Nag-stop yung. All right. All right, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second quarterly webinar in 2025. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Patricia, and before we jump into our session, let me just introduce ourselves. So, we are the Erudite Reliability Services OPC. We are committed to empowering engineers and organizations with industry leading asset performance management solutions. We focus on providing high quality training, consulting services, and insights to help businesses achieve operational excellence. Additionally, we believe in sharing knowledge beyond live sessions. So, our past webinars, including in depth discussions on renewable energy, asset reliability, and performance optimization, are available on our official YouTube channel. This is actually our 16th webinar. So, if you have missed the others, you can go ahead and check our YouTube channel for the replays and of course, subscribe for more and get updated or notified. All right, so let's go right ahead to our topic for today, leveraging long-term strategy and early leadership involvement for STO improvement and predictability. Shutdowns, turnarounds, and outages, or STOs, are critical events in asset-intensive industries. They require not just technical execution, but foresight, coordination, and strategic planning. Today, we'll explore how early engagement from leadership and a strong long-term strategy can drive more predictable, efficient, and value-driven STO outcomes. To walk us through to today's topic, we're pleased to introduce our speaker. He is a seasoned maintenance, reliability, and turnaround manager with 18 years of experience in the oil and gas industry. With strong frontline operations and leadership background, he specializes in work process management, turnaround planning and execution, and project delivery. He has led major shutdowns across key assets such as Malampaya, Brunei Shell, E11 Hub, and Malikai platforms. He has also co-facilitated Shell's turnaround management training and is known for managing large-scale contracts and budgets with a risk-based, result-driven approach. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Ernesto Cananan II. Sir Nessie.
Okay, thank you, Patricia. You'll be sharing the screen or I'll share mine na lang. Can you hear me, ba? Audio check.
Yes, sir. Can we just have a...
Okay, I'll just share my screen na lang. It should be easier.
Everyone, is Sir Nestie's audio good? Like, can you give us a thumbs up? And thank you, Sir Galliera.
There you go. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. No? So I'll be going through basically some elements of shutdown, turnaround, and outage management, particularly focusing on long-term strategy and early leadership involvement. Because by experience, actually, from my end, really a lot of the elements that contributing to the success of a particular shutdown or turnaround event rests heavily during the early stages and making sure that there are clear boundaries of where the turnaround planning team can really quote unquote play around whenever we're planning an event, I should say. So I'll be going through that particular area in this particular webinar, and I hope you get something out of it that is useful for your own businesses. Just a quick safety reminder, since most of us are online. So of course, make sure you stay aware of surroundings, especially for those wearing headsets. So make sure that you still hear a bit of your environment in case there's something that you have to attend to, or there's some emergency you have to be aware of. Make sure your sitting configuration is ergonomic because most likely in the next hour, I'll be expecting this lecture to go for around 1 hour, and then feel free to ask questions thereafter. Make sure your seating is ergonomic. Clear your area of any tripping hazards in case you want to walk around, get some coffee or whatever. And then stand up and stretch regularly since we're all seated or in our areas. And then if you're dialing from home, make sure there are no unattended sources of fire or toxic fumes for your own safety. Okay. As shared earlier, we'll be doing a bit of introduction. Then I'll be sharing my bit really on the topic, and then there'll be some bit of Q&A, and then yeah, a bit of closing. Um, House rules, of course, stay on mute. That was shared already by Patricia. So stay on mute to minimize background noise so that you can at least hear whatever I'm telling in terms of the topic. And then one speaker at a time so that we can all hear and understand each other. So be mentally present and listen. Please advise when stepping out, for other important matters. And so in case you need to be called out for whatever reason. And then, of course, respect others' opinions and views in case there are differing views on a particular topic. And of course, even this is going to be a short session, make sure we all enjoy and have fun. All right. So I've been introduced in passing, so I probably won't go through here. So I started 2007 actually, working for Shell Philippines Exploration as an operations, and then transferred to maintenance reliability. And then bulk of my experience, you could say my comfort zone is really with turnaround management, 2011 and 2017, wherein I'm directly involved in the actual planning and execution. And then since 2017 until now, I am indirectly involved in terms of the turnaround, mainly more on providing direction and steers for managing the events. So yeah, so up until now, while I'm managing the wider maintenance and reliability, I'm still looking after turnaround execution and implementation, but more on the steering side. So right, hopefully by end of the session, you get a little bit of expansion of your knowledge base, particularly on the early stages of the turnaround planning and appreciation of that particular area, the long-term planning and understanding the different roles within the organization and the importance of leadership and steering teams. Okay. So for the main webinar outlines, of course, we're going to go to different turnaround definitions. The first two topics is really more on a broad brush of what the entire turnaround management is about, just to refresh your ideas for those have taken something similar before. And then the last two topics really, you could say the meat of the entire webinar. All right. Just the first slide is really more on the basic turnaround definitions and you could say refreshers in a sense. So what is a turnaround? So according to Merriam-Webster, so it's the action of, if it's a noun, we're technically talking around, action of receiving, processing, and returning something. So quick turnaround of something. So give something and receive something back. So it's a process of readying a transport vehicle or departure after its arrival, like planes, choppers, when it arrives somewhere, then you have to have a quick turnaround and go back to wherever it originated from. From a verb, it means to become changed for the better, for which you can say that's the more um, relatable definition when we're talking about a turnaround or shutdown or outage management, because during a turnaround event, we actually change equipment for the better, because that's where we do quite a lot of changes in the plant, whether it's doing critical maintenance, providing some upgrades, and a few other items that really improve the asset, particularly whether it's on the production side, safety side, or reliability side. So in the context of manufacturing energy, so the turnaround or outage event is, because it's a scheduled event generally. A plant, wherein a plant of section thereof is taken offline, whether it's, as I mentioned, conducting maintenance, implement upgrades, or really as part of general production planning. So there are occasions to really put it down, but of course, since we put the asset down, it's of course best to optimize that outage and do something that we can only do only during when the asset is actually out. Um, by the way, please feel free if I'm speaking quite fast or if I'm going through the content. So just call my attention so that we can go back to the material. Um, but yeah, moving along. So why do we need to have a turnaround? No, it's a business event. So technically it's a business event, I should say. So we normally aim for maximization of the cash flow in the end. As I mentioned, it's a business. We need to earn money. And of course, which means to a certain extent, we need to ensure there's business longevity. So whether it's we do a turnaround to make sure we improve the production and sales, we conduct a turnaround just to enhance the safety, because let's say we do repair or upgrade of equipment wherein we replace some leaks, we replace some piping or vessels with leaks, we repair some faulty equipment that may cause electrocution to our personnel. um, and then important of turnaround as well, cost, because generally waiting for equipment to really force us to go out to go on shutdown without proper planning, it generally costs more than you know outage or doing maintenance on a predetermined window. So it's best to really lump them all together, execute in one window, than just really wait for it to really dictate your own outage. Not to mention, of course, usually businesses have clear interface and linkages with stakeholders. You have either upstream or downstream customers that you have to also take care of, not just your business in silo. Okay. So what comprises a successful turnaround? So usually this is how we define um, turnaround. There are generally five success areas we look at there for an every event. So we make sure that all committed work are done. So that's on the scope side, and on time, because we normally commit a particular turnaround based on a particular window, whether it's 10 days, 20 days, 50 days. With the right quality, make sure that if we really commit to a particular date, we meet that, and then there are no hiccups thereafter. Safely, of course, we make sure that everyone who is involved in the execution is really going home safely. And of course, since still at the end it's a business event, I should say, um, rather other than of course delivering what is intended to do, we execute them at the expected cost that we are planned it for, right? So with this particular success areas in mind, of course, we try to bring the turnaround along. And how do we actually just a refresh on how do we actually execute a turnaround? So a particular turnaround event. So I just simplified it currently in six general phases. If for other assets it could be seven or eight. There are some assets that are, you could say, the turnaround phases is really pared down to five. But I guess for practicality, I'm putting it down around somewhere in the middle, so six. So it's really coming from the long-term planning and strategy, which is, you could say, bulk of what I will be discussing today. And then, of course, the rest is really, you could say, a number of us would probably be familiar, especially if we're involved in the maintenance planning, special maintenance scheduling, because those are part where we start doing the scoping up until execution and gathering the lessons learned up in the end. But we'll still go through them one by one for the next couple of minutes. For the long-term planning and strategy for the turnaround phase. So this is where we align a particular turnaround event or an outage event with a long-term business strategy. So we focus a particular event that is intended to be executed in the next 6 months or 12 months. But of course, that's generally or usually tied or ideally tied to a long-term business plan. You could say if it's part of a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan, that should be included. And then understanding high-level synergy among different strategic elements of the businesses. This is also the time where you develop, a specific strategy for a particular event, just to define the boundaries, whether it's the execution window rather, whether it's the duration, how much we're investing on that one, and then strategic intent on key turnaround elements like how we're going to manage it, who will be leading it, how do we manage our scope, are we going to have a different mode of contracting, and then risk management. Then we go to the scoping, wherein you could say we gather, assess, and then agree on criticalities and how do we actually manage the scopes, particularly after sign off. How do we um, change? How do we manage scope changes? If there, we normally try to control scopes as early as possible, but how do we manage in case there are changes coming from scoping and leading to execution? Since usually that has a difference of somewhere around 4-8 months, and on complex turnarounds, even 18 months thereabouts. And this is where the part where we start to do initial work preparation, because on some cases we need to identify long lead items to be ordered, um, contracts to be initially established if we need to properly source and vet these contractors. So this is where we do that preliminary work preparation. Then once we've done the preliminary work preparation, that is when we start. Of course, this is, you could say, the longest part of the turnaround planning rather. So this is where we really mature all the individual scopes that we have planned. So whether it's the individual scopes, also making sure that all the other elements within the planning is incorporated, whether it's operations planning, isolations planning, safety planning, logistical planning, in case there's kitting, there's housing that requires to be done for the people, since we normally uh, since normally turnarounds involve a lot of people, not just the usual number of people we mobilize on site. So these particular elements need to be really looked at very close lenses. So this is also the time where we aggregate all these plans towards a unified, detailed turnaround execution plan. So we don't want individual plans from operations, maintenance, projects. So this is the time where we actually cluster and gather them all together, make sense, and then make sure that all the resources are optimized rather than uh, you know asking them all to mobilize on different times, and then the last thing we want is everyone fighting over the same resources. So this is where we align them all. Pre-execution is really making sure that we don't execute anything that's non-turnaround or non-outage event to an outage event. So this is where we prepare the site, scaffolding, paint removal, access, initial tagging of flanges that has to be moved, electrical equipment that needs to be isolated. We sort of identify them upfront. So this is where we uh, make sure that it's identified so that it's going to be seamless once execution comes in. So this is also the time when we stage and kit our materials, onboard our personnel, the contractors, because usually there's a number of first timers on a turnaround, as I mentioned, because there's a lot of people coming in. So we need to make sure that these people are going to be onboarded and safe, and then make sure that everything is, once we push the button to put the asset or the factory or the refinery out, everything is ready, and then everyone is really ready to go to execute. So this is where we execute the turnaround or the outage, execute the plan as how we have prepared it, manage and control work, because of course, as much as we try to make our plan predictable and what they call that, and seamless. Of course, there are some surprises that are still remaining even after we do all this meticulous planning. So we still try to manage and control them as they come along, whether it's something we still can do during this outage window, or it's something that we will just manage as a business moving forward and wait for the next outage event. And then this is when we also try to monitor the progress and see if are we really winning in you could say meeting our turnaround objectives. This is usually where a lot of the you could say the symptoms or hiccups of the planning comes out, because this is when a lot of things become apparent, whether it's delayed materials, delayed manpower, quality issues, etc., etc. So this is where you say the most visible part of the turnaround. And of course, you could say this is one of the very important yet sometimes um, look missed out element. Is more on the closeout, because of course there's a lot of value leakage if we don't do proper housekeeping, demobilization, timely demobilization rather, and then managing our surpluses, because they have particular costs attached to it, and including vendor payment. This is also the time where we try to gather our lessons learned and make sure that we report them out so that we can because after post turnaround and close up, it's actually a loop going back to the long-term planning and strategy, because we're going to utilize that as an input for the next turnaround event, as indicated in there. Okay, so I've gone through the just a brief refresher of what a turnaround is, and what you could say the turnaround phases entail. We're going now to the, you could say, quote unquote, the meat of the discussion. We're really going through the long-term planning and turnaround strategy, and its importance of in having a robust long-term plan to make sure we have our seamless planning moving forward. Okay, I'll just checking the screen if there are questions. There, one sec. Okay, no questions so far. Okay, moving along. So this is you could say we could say idealistic picture wherein there's a linkage between our long-term business plan and how it trickles down to a particular turnaround event. So a shutdown turnaround outage event should not be taken in silo. No, so you could say let's not look each of the individual, you could say, what orange or peach boxes here in isolation, because as I mentioned, it's a business event, and as such, it's, the turnaround or outage event is attached in delivering business bottom line. So you could say it still rolls back to the long-term business plan, or you could say the business longevity, I should say. So whether it's in the form of production or as I mentioned, cash flow earlier. Okay. Um, just to explain the item here. So of course, usually we have a long-term business plan wherein, what's our outlook as an organization. And usually our input for that one from the turnaround is really, which particular years do we actually expect an outage to happen, and then that's when we normally try to align all major activities that has to be done, whether it's major maintenance or major project or major upgrades in the facility, if there are some major tie-ins or major sections that needs to be commissioned or something similar. And then once, you could say, that is identified from a business plan or a long-term plan perspective, we normally put it as part of a turnaround strategy, which then gets uh, becomes an input to the turnaround event. You could say as part of the boundaries. The long-term business plan as well rolls over to the different rolls down to the different, whether it's a major project plan or project portfolio. What upgrades are we actually planning in the next years? It also rolls down to what do we want to do from a maintenance perspective. What major overhauls do we need to do in our rotating equipment? Are there equipment or vessels that need to be internally inspected or commissioned out at a long period so that we can do intrusive activities, however that may look like, also including some of the electrical systems. And then of course, these two particular areas can either be events that doesn't require an outage, so that's the grayed out area there, or the non-turnaround event. Whereas of course, the items that you could say concern us particularly for this topic is really more on making sure which of this maintenance and project events really has to go to a particular outage event or a turnaround event. So of course, these two particular clusters, major chunks from the long term trickling down to medium term or the 2 years window, should be fully aligned, within the asset in terms of integrated planning, so that it's seamless. There's no misalignments between what is contained in the business plan or what is assumed in the business plan versus what is assumed in a particular turnaround event or maintenance plans, I should say. And then, as I mentioned, as I shared earlier on the blue text below, ultimate goal of effective turnaround management is to make sure we still optimize the cash flow while maintaining asset integrity and reliability. The technical part of it is really targeted by the maintenance and the project activities, and then the cash flow is really making sure, because if these are not aligned, then it could cause probably more outage windows or longer turnarounds than what we have planned or assumed for. So, sorry, going back first on the turnaround strategy bit here, the second box on the above. What are usually the major considerations as part of or consideration or elements that are included in the long-term business plan? One is frequency. It's really more of how frequent do we actually have an outage window, whether it's is it from a facility perspective or a business perspective, is it annual, is it 6 weeks, 6 monthly? On some, there are some actually, I've heard they do it 6 monthly, not the most optimal, but yeah, it does happen. There are some that happens every 2 yearly. There are some that are, you could say, aggressive, uh, yeah, aggressive, that they want to happen only once every 5 years, for example, or even 10 years. Very very rare, but it does happen. So these are the considerations that we put in there. The frequency is usually dictated by these particular elements. There are fixed interval requirements, usually the maintenance and inspection requirements, because sometimes there are predetermined lifespan for our vessels, for example, based on internal corrosion, based on the coating that we have applied there, and the fluid or the materials being processed in there. How long do we actually have to keep this equipment running before we actually do intrusive inspections? So that goes for the vessels, pipings, and then the like, and tanks. And there are certain equipment that have sort of historical predetermined lifespan, like for example electrical, that has somewhere around 6 to 10 years, even 20 years on some assets. So that usually determines how frequent do we actually want to inspect them. So these are fixed interval inspection, for which sometimes it dictates the requirement of your outage, especially if these equipment are not redundant, meaning they're just single train items. There are ones Second item is once-off internal requirements. So these are usually during asset facility growth or tie-ins, wherein you can say a major section of the plant is being commissioned because we're, let's say, expanding the business. We're putting an additional train. We're commissioning additional line for, you could say, whether it's petrochemical or other similar requirements. And then, of course, there's the third one is more on external requirements, because more often than not, our assets are tied to whether a facility upstream or downstream that's not managed by our own businesses. So sometimes we normally have to align by their requirements. So, and of course, rather than having two outages, for example, from our end, because one is dictated by us and then the other is dictated by the stakeholders, then it's good to actually optimize it, and then really have just one outage. We still maximize our production and our cash flow. These three items are generally considered or termed as drivers, outage drivers or turnaround drivers, because they are the reasons to actually drive why do we need to have a particular turnaround event. Meaning, usually if these activities are not done, it has a serious business consequence. For the first part, on the maintenance and inspection, usually that has asset safety or reliability or integrity impacts, because sometimes it causes electrical failures, leaks, and a few other hazardous conditions. The internal requirements is usually tied with opportunities and business growth. So meaning there's a lot of value leakage or value loss if that's not implemented. And then of course, as I mentioned, the third one is really more on where it goes. It's either on the optimization part or sometimes on the reputation part, especially if we're not fully aligned with our stakeholders. So with aligning of the frequencies for this, for the intensity, less frequent turnaround means more production. We try to optimize them, fewer man-hour exposure, because as shared, turnarounds usually have a lot of people involved. And then if we have less frequent turnarounds, of course, there's a lower life cycle cost, because every turnaround event or outage event is quite costly. Okay. The second aspect that's considered during a turnaround strategy, other than frequency, is the complexity. Complexity. Why complexity? Because it actually dictates how long, how long do we need to have the outage, and how far do we need to prepare in advance. Because it determines the amount of effort to be put into the preparation. So, more effort required means longer preparation time needed. So, of course, if it's a simple outage with few scopes, of course, we don't need to prepare a lot, unless we, of course, know there are some scopes that needs to be for parts to be ordered much in advance, for example. But naturally, these are some of the considerations we have in terms of how can we say that a turnaround is complex, more complex or less complex. We normally look at it from a requirement from an execution man hours, meaning how much people do we actually need for the execution, which is sometimes dictated on, of course, the duration. Whether it's 10 days, 50 days. Of course, usually 50 days is more complex. That means we're going to have more people on board, or at least more man hours total on board. Distribution of work among projects and maintenance. Why? Because this dictates, you could say, more on the synergy or the integration requirement between different parties. Because more often than not, the timeline for projects or minor modifications usually different from the timeline of maintenance and integrity. So we need, of course, the more the more that there's a balance between these two areas, the more complex it is. Rather than let's say 100% maintenance. More often than not, that's much simpler. So that's part of the consideration. Location is another one, of course. As if it's a land-based asset that is quite near to a major road access, then that's far easier in terms of complexity as compared to, let's say, an offshore environment, let's say in Russia, where, of course, other than the geopolitical issues right now, sometimes freezes during winter. So items like this are also considered in terms of complexity. And then, of course, you could say directly linked with the numbers being shared here, whether it's man hours and duration. Of course, there's the cost aspect of it. And then the table on the right is really more you could say sample of what how do we consider how far do we need to consider planning for a turnaround. Just a rough just a rough I could say guideline. So usually high complexity turnaround requires around a year and a half, at most 2 years. lead time to prepare, because of course all the integration required, all the preparation required, all the contracts that needs to be established, etc., etc. So as compared to, let's say, low complexity, wherein of course if you think that all the resources are immediately available, it's really more on making sure that just aligning the stakeholders so that we have all our outages lined up. So more often than not, it's low complexity, especially if it's mainly just maintenance activities. Usually it's around 6 to 12 months preparation. But that's just you could say a rule of thumb or a guideline. I mean, for your own businesses, that could vary. I've seen some companies even with medium complexities, they're trying to push less than a year preparation. If it works, it works. Because of course, the shorter preparation times, that means also the shorter, less manpower to involve in. You can say it also is less costly, I should say, less complex. Okay, right. So the turnaround assumption and premises, this is actually, you could say, the bridge from the long term to the event specific, you could say, boundaries, I should say. So I mentioned already around complexity and frequency. So there are a few other turnaround assumptions that needs to be considered as, or you could say, boundaries that needs to be set to make sure we know the playground that we are in. It clearly lays the turnaround assumptions and premises, lays down planning assumptions as basis of the succeeding actions that intended to be taken. Um, this include, specialized logistical arrangement. Do we need to mobilize, let's say, for offshore environment, special types of vessels? For land-based, are there either rigs or trucks or very heavy equipment that needs to be considered? Let's say mobile cranes that needs to be planned upfront because they're also not cheap. Are there major machinery to be mobilized, requiring major investment, whether it's complex, let's say, compressors or turbines? Um, do we also consider manpower sourcing strategy, whether it's are they going to be staff, are they going to be contracted, are they going to be really entirely new, or is something that we just expanded the current organization? Are we going to get them from the current organization and then have them double hat or really change their roles on a short term basis? Things like this. So it lays down assumptions because sometimes, of course, that removes the complexity and confusion, especially some turnaround planning, of course, happens in parallel whilst the day-to-day maintenance and projects planning are also ongoing. So the turnaround assumptions and premises provides clarity on the decision-making criteria for the turnaround organization with regards to prioritization and trade-offs. Particularly, we call it the scope acceptance criteria. It's really more on how do we define whether, because more often than not, there's a whole list of scopes we want to execute in a turnaround, and we won't be able to fit everything in an optimized window, however we want to do it. So how do we optimize it? How do we make sure which is the important ones for our business, and what boundaries do we set, and so that we can agree as an entire organization. This is will only execute scopes with particular risks up to a certain point, or particular thresholds up to a certain point. So that's the scope acceptance criteria, and then that's normally set way upfront as part of the long-term planning and strategy development. At the same time, on the governance side, it demarcates area of accountability within the turnaround organization, and requirement to escalate between the turnaround planning, turnaround management team or outage management team, and the steering committee, because you could say this is risk-based, you could say, accountability. So whether it's something that if it breaches, you could say the first two sentences I shared here, that's usually within the turnaround steering committee's realm, that okay, let's say we're changing from a 20-day outage to a 40-day outage for whatever reason. That's usually you could say a higher management call. But if it's you could say a small change within how we're planning a particular scope, then you could say that's within the turnaround management team's call, without having to get the rest of the higher management involved. So there's clear demarcation on which decisions are done on which particular level, so that you could say that's less talking, less confusion, and then everyone is empowered at the right level. That's the importance of turnaround assumption and premises. Okay, going back here on the yeah on this the slide I've shown earlier. No, so we're just going to zero in on particular area. So what happens if, let's say, a number of the linkages we have here, let's say from the long-term business plan, trickling down to the turnaround event, is, you should say, quote unquote, missing, if if we're not communicating properly, because communication between these areas, long-term plan down to the individual turnaround event or outage event premises are, you could say, missing. What would happen? So let's say if there's no linkages between the long-term business plan to the maintenance reference plan or project portfolio, more often than not, it results to interim outage windows, because of course, um, if they're not aligned, the long term business plan does not take into account, when do this particular maintenance or project events need to happen, wherein it impacts production, for example. If it does not impact production, well and good, because it can happen anytime as long as the asset is running. But if it does impact production, we have, to shut down the train, put a particular, even an entire asset out. It won't help the business if, if they are severely misaligned. So more often than not, of course, if these are big ticket items, it's sometimes inevitable to really put the asset down, because of course it's the value loss, for example, for projects, or the risk involved of running the equipment with, let's say, impaired, say, high level of corrosion, of course, puts the asset more at risk than keeping it running. So more often than not, it drives a separate outage just to either repair it or put temporary measures to keep the asset running safely on the short term. If the maintenance and project portfolio are, you could say, not communicating, leading to either non-turnaround or a turnaround event, um, they normally eventually clash for prioritization, and usually the distribution of resources, as well as usually the resources here are the experts here, whether it's discipline engineers, whether it's the planners, whether schedulers, or even the frontline or site-based resources. Normally they clash for prioritization, and sometimes, of course, it's sometimes difficult to actually demarcate between which of the two quote, quote, teams are more important, because more often than not, of course, there's value loss or risk involved if one or the other gets compromised. So more often than not, it sometimes causes additional cost, because sometimes we have to catch up, whether it's let's say for a land-based asset. Usually we normally try to catch up by, putting in more people to the asset, just to catch up on our plans. And then on the worst case, it drives separate outage turnaround or outage windows if, one or the other cannot be done at the right time. That for example, the let's say project team want to execute something by, let's say, this September, and then at the same time, the maintenance risk can only tolerate until August, for example. So that might drive separate windows. And on the last one, if there's no clear linkage between the long-term turnaround strategy trickling down to the particular turnaround event, or you could say, what if you could say the premises and assumptions slide that I've shown earlier is, you could say, weak or non-existent. It Other than leading to interim outage windows, inefficiencies during the implementation may lead to additional cost and resources, because of course, if the turnaround event premises are not aligned with the long-term plan, um, more often than not, you could say, for example, the scoping. So the scoping may not be thorough enough, that some of the items or the risks involved does not cater for addressing the risk up until the next outage window. So, for example, we plan our outage every 3 years, and then we only scope for activities that only assure us to operate safely in the next 1 year. Then naturally, after 1 year, 1 year and a half, possibly, if we can tolerate it, of course, the organization will be very uncomfortable in trying to operate the asset, because, of course, come on the second year, we're definitely thinking that our, let's say, safety or integrity is compromised. So those are things that we need to make sure. So that means for the turnaround event itself, we make sure that, I could say, we try to execute scopes or activities that assure us, let's say, for example, if we're assuming an outage every 3 years, all scopes that give us assurance that we are safe to operate in the next 3 years are executed completely. So that's the intent of making sure that is very, very much linked. Okay. Um, Front end loading. So this is actually a common term more for projects, but it does have similar parallelism with, you could say, turnaround, because turnaround planning is, you could say, project planning, similar a lot of similar elements in project planning, wherein there's a lot of uncertainties upfront, risks to be managed, whilst at the same time, if you try to play catch up in the end, trying to manage these risks, more often than not, the expenditures required to catch up and manage those risks continue to grow. Not to mention a lot of the influence or the changes we can make to, you could say, quote unquote, make our lives easier is usually happens on the earlier part, and that's where you could say the major influence is happening. And then we rarely have low influence on the tail end, because that's when we normally try to really invest a lot, cash out a lot, if we really want to make something happen on very short notice. Because as mentioned, on the tail end, which is that's when the execution phase happen, that's where most of the failure of the planning becomes apparent. You know, as I mentioned, if there are hiccups in the work preparation, materials that are missing, personnel that's, you could say, not capable or not ready to execute what they're really there for. This is the time when we normally, quote unquote, regrettably even firefight to meet our project objectives. So because that's really play we really try to play catch up at this point in time. And then more often than not, our options are limited to get the best, best for value. As I mentioned, low influence, because we really try to play catch up at this point in time, as compared to, um, you know if we try to, do everything more on during the long term planning and strategy development, try to make things as robust as possible upfront. We have an early control of scope based on risk to business. At this, if we really try to make sure we have our scopes robust as early as possible during execution phase, you won't have to worry about break-ins, sudden requirements from whichever group within the organization to request that, oh, we want to execute this particular scope and that. So of course, if we have agreed a scope control upfront, that's not going to be a discussion during execution phase. Um, High level of influence for both the outage event and long-term aspirations. So meaning, linked to the previous slide I've shared, if there are some elements there that's not aligned, we normally captured in the execution phase, or the latter part, wherein we realize that, oh, we've actually scoped incorrectly, that we might need to have an interim outage in the next year or so. That happened in my case before, needing we missed out a particular scope, for which the next year we had to have a 7 day outage thereafter. One of the lessons learned. And then, of course, whilst as early as we have on the strategy phase, there is heavy flexibility on the options available. So meaning we have more options on, on the contractors we can get, if it's a very highly specialized resource, or the materials, whether it's a specialized material, or something that's off the shelf. And then at the same time, we have a lot of time to really strategize on what's the best course of action in addressing a particular risk to a particular scope. So, all right. So just looking at some statistics from prior benchmarking done. So in terms of, you could say, quote unquote, why some turnarounds fail. So more than half turnarounds experience significant delays. So in terms of statistics, almost 50% of work-related accidents on manufacturing plants occur during plant maintenance outages. And then in terms of cost, 80% of them usually go over budget by 10%, which is, you could say, more or less 5 to 10% is the usual threshold for budget management, in terms of, what is a good range. Normally more than 10% is already not tolerable, I should say. So why am I highlighting this particular piece of information? Because this particular areas are, you could say, heavily influenceable by applying the prior slide I've shared. Delays, or even added turnaround windows, is heavily impacted by misaligned long-term planning to the particular turnaround strategy. Um, if we're not clearly defining our turnaround strategy and how we're going to manage HSE upfront, that usually accounts to work-related accidents. Or if we haven't vetted our contractors properly and timely, uh, we might not be sure ourselves if the people we're mobilizing on site are fully equipped to implement all the safety controls we have in our business. And then, as shared earlier, on the cost aspect, if you could say 80%, no, that's actually quite a lot of the turnaround. So meaning, if your particular turnaround event is over budget, you can actually even say within the statistical average. But yeah, I mean, it's not, it wouldn't hurt, you know trying to apply long-term planning just to make sure we have more control, more optimization, more efficiency that we can apply, you could say, and get the best for value for whatever strategy we're going to implement in our turnaround. So so that's the first part of this webinar in terms of uh, you know value of the long-term strategy and early planning, I should say, and making sure our boundaries are set as early as possible. I'm moving forward towards, you could say, the second topic now, which is on the organization bit, with heavy focus on the steering committee, turnaround steering committee. I'll let, but give me 30 seconds. I'll just go through if there are some questions on the chat. Okay, none. Okay. Turnaround organization, right? So the turnaround organization, similar with the first part, no, it needs to be thought of as early as possible. Just not just the organization. It's not just, you could say, slapping people in and hope things fall into place. Now, there needs to be some governance structure around it, with the dedicated personnel identified up front, and phased properly. Because of course there are some positions that are not needed up until the latter part of the planning phase. And they need to be targeted to the key delivery areas. So meaning key delivery areas I've shared earlier, the turnaround success definition. So there's safety, there's delivering it on time, delivering it 100%, the right quality and within cost. So we need to make sure that there are dedicated manpower in there, like a specific cost engineer, specific HSE focal point, specific work planning team and operations to support the scoping and the quality, and materials management team as well. So things like this needs to be considered. The organization should be able to support the long-term plan requirements as mentioned. No? So not just a particular turnaround event, but also help provide insight on managing turnaround intervals. Rather than, let's say, accepting, oh, we normally have a turnaround every 1 year or 2 years. They should also be confident and capable enough to really challenge, 1 year or 2 year, can we actually have it every 3 years, for example, because that would then help the business, as mentioned, lower frequency turnaround also means, in the end, higher life cycle gains. um, there should The consideration for the organization should also look at continuity in turnaround events. More often than not, this is between the management team, or on an ideal case, a dedicated turnaround management personnel that looks after outages that happens every so often. So that ensures continuity, because as I shared earlier, once you complete a turnaround, all the learnings from that one, all the outcome of the maintenance and projects needs to be rolled over for the next event as part of making it seamless. And then embedding strategic contract elements. So making sure that not just the contract alone, no, but there are any other strategic elements that needs to be considered or trickle down from the long term down to the event specific. More often than not, supporting long-term plan requirements is actually influenced, or you could say, dictated by the steering committee, with support of the turnaround or outage event manager if identified upfront. The turnaround organization should take into account capability and competency of the local organization, of course, because of course, best case is there is internal knowledge retained to make sure, since turnaround as compared to, let's say, day-to-day maintenance, an outage event doesn't happen as frequent. So more often than not, the capability and competency for that one is not as consistent. So it's best to take into account how do we make sure that particular capability and competency is retained in the organization, especially if we need an event to happen in a year or so. So there needs to have a view on development and retention of these management skills. And of course, the third aspect is, just the bread and butter of turnaround management, making sure that whoever we put in place is able to plan and execute our whatever turnaround we have set our minds to, and making sure that there's continuous improvement for that one. So whether it's, managing progress, managing risks, and then improving the communication and follow up and look back from start to finish of the turnaround. All right. So from an archetype perspective, simplify it. How does it look like? Three major clusters really. There's the steering team, usually consisting of the senior management, and then there's the turnaround management team. So that's where you could say the in the turnaround delivery teams. These are the event specific teams that look after the actual planning and to execution, scoping to execution of an event, and then you know for which the left side of this particular archetype shows the boundaries, how to escalate issues from the delivery teams up to the steering team, whilst the right side shows how the delivery or the guidance is provided, just to make sure that the risk is managed at the right level, and the steer is given at the right frequencies. So from the steering team down to the turnaround management team, so there should be a regular providing of guidance, making sure the the entire turnaround journey is aligned with what we are intending in the long-term business plan. Since the steering team, of course, a number of the steering team being part of the senior management team are also making sure that the long-term business plan is in full alignment of whatever we are doing, from a day-to-day in the business. So that should be consistent of checking in with the turnaround management team regularly. Are they all aligned? Are we on track, etc., etc. And then the turnaround management team, of course, via the turnaround delivery teams, deliver the milestone plan. These are the specific turnaround or outage delivery elements, whether it's operations plan, isolations plan, contract management plan, logistics plan, facilities management plan, safety plan, etc., etc. And then combined with regular team huddles, defined we define clear roles and responsibilities. And then, of course, as this particular team goes about their daily tasks. Of course, there are some exceptions that has to be escalated or that cannot be managed within their own spheres. So that's when they escalate. So for turnaround delivery teams, if you could say a clash between operations and let's say safety in terms of requirements, in terms of controls. So that's when they escalate to the turnaround management team and try to really make a let's say act as a tiebreaker, or how to look around on managing the risk around it if really cannot be compromised, then settle it within that sphere. And then if there's anything that breaches the wider turnaround boundaries, that's what normally gets escalated from the turnaround management team to the steering team. So those that you could say undermine or impact the turnaround premises. So this, as I mentioned, these are the ones that impact either the duration, whether it's longer or shorter duration, whether it impacts the what they call that safety, meaning if there's a major safety controls or safety premises within the operations that have to be breached, whether it's the number of personnel that can be tolerated, um, managing the hazard classification within the area. So these are things that has to be discussed at the steering team or the senior management level, and then having a clear demarcation on what needs to be escalated. Of course, make sure that the discussions happen at the right level, rather than you could say steering team getting involved with very small issues that from a practicality perspective ideally should have been addressed by the specific turnaround delivery teams. So that needs to be you could say defined as early as possible, so that you could say all the planning has to happen seamlessly and at the right risk management level. Focusing on the steering team, since we're looking at early leadership involvement. So the turnaround steering team consists mainly of the senior management team. So it's the governing team accountable for target setting, resourcing, scope management, and risk management, um, and overall turnaround readiness and assurance. So so you could say above the turnaround management team, they really look at making sure that what they have committed from a business planning perspective gets delivered. So as a minimum, as shared, it's the scope, duration, cost, safety. So these are the metrics that the steering team usually quote unquote care about. So and then that's where the turnaround management team plays around, I should say, just to make sure that is fully aligned, still fully aligned with that objectives. So they timely discuss and resolve major blockers that undermine those particular success areas, and then that's normally escalated by the turnaround manager if there is something that is worthy of being escalated, whether it's an impact the logistics plan that will either cause a particular scope to happen from let's say 10 days to become 20 days. And that means if it becomes a longer scope, that will might render the turnaround to be delayed. So these are things that we normally gets escalated. Um, the steering team also ensure there are regular turnaround reviews or assurances. This is best case, meaning there's usually a third party or third person view that needs to hold a mirror to the turnaround steering team to say, have we actually done everything as per the milestone plan? Are there risks not easily visible that needs to be um, made to be put into light so that it can be managed properly? So these are, you could say, part of the accountability of the steering team. And then guarantee alignment internally among key players, because more often than not, as mentioned, they are senior management, while at the same time they also are coming from the various key players within the organization. They usually are the maintenance managers, the operations managers, the projects manager, safety manager, etc., etc., which is the typical steering team composition. Because more often than not, these are the different areas within the organization that usually try to normally have some bit of push and pull, because of not more on different clashes, but of course, let's say executing more maintenance work that makes the asset a little more safer, but of course it costs a little more, so that there has to be balance from that perspective. Let's say the projects team executing something that's not fully aligned with what the controls are in the asset for the operations and maintenance. Of course, it may share with the resources some concerns on HSE. So the steering team make sure that in case there is some misalignment for that needs to be gets escalated at their level. You could say they're the final tiebreaker, I should say, if it cannot be managed by the individual delivery focal points for, let's say, the operations, HSE, projects, etc., etc. So that's the intent for the steering team. And then early involvement for them, of course, is key, because, of course, as I mentioned, they set the boundaries. The number two, they understand the risks involved, and then they can then easily provide and timely provide, you could say, response to concerns, and providing the guidance to break any ties. Yeah. This is just I just added this slide, no, just to share. No? It's the same archetype that I've shown earlier. There's a steering committee, and then the turnaround manager and the coordinator. There is usually the turnaround management team. They normally look after the overall progress of the specific execution event. And then those underneath them are the delivery teams, which, as mentioned, the delivery teams are also similar to the steering committee, that they are represented by the key performance areas. There also are similar on the delivery areas. Delivery teams underneath the turnaround management team, whether it's on the scheduling and planning, safety, materials and contracts, maintenance, engineering, and then of course finance. So, and then of course, establishing this organization, you could say, is a responsibility and accountability of the steering committee. In terms of setting it up front, of course, they try to appoint the turnaround manager as early as possible, usually during the long-term planning and strategy development. And then the turnaround manager then provides guidance, or provides input to the steering committee in terms of how to face hiring, or obtaining the rest of the delivery team. Where do we onboard an operations focal point? When do we get them involved? When to involve our contracts and supply chain team in terms of resourcing, etc., etc. Which phase of the turnaround planning? So that's when we actually try to make sure that we optimize the time, and at the same time optimize the cost and optimize the resources, I should say. Okay. And having them upfront, available, and established, of course, number one, apart from, of course, optimizing the delivery, that makes sure that if they are really resourced early enough, then that means we won't have to play catch up if there are a number of, let's say, sudden or surprise scopes that has to be prepared. And I think this is my last slide. Yeah. So yeah, so we normally call it turnaround steering committee, because steering is not just managing and decision making. Steering is really making sure that there is a direction, not just making decisions based on risks that's escalated. So it's really making sure that we're really on track, and then keeping ourselves on track. And then if there are some certain changes in the higher business environment, the steering committee is also guiding the turnaround team to also go towards that direction, because of course on certain cases the business environment is dynamic, that some elements need to be addressed quickly. um, just to show here, no, of course the gray chevron there are of course still the same, six phase planning that I've shared earlier. And then on the left of that, of course, there's, I call it the perpetual risk management, because there's always risks that have to be managed from start to finish. Ideally, most of them are addressed or closed out or mitigated by execution, but of course, it still happens, perpetually. But even so, of course, a number of them is set by the steering committee upfront. Those are on the blue boxes. You could say that either the questions or the decisions or the steers or the guidance being provided by the steering committee on the different phases. So for the long-term planning and strategy, of course, that's when the key success factors are defined. That's the one I've shown earlier with the multiple colors. Just as a sample, it could be different from your organization. That's when we also set boundaries. What's the cost we're operating with? What How does the organization look like? What's our tolerance to scopes? And then we also define during the long-term planning. How do we assure ourselves that when we reach detailed planning, we're really on track, I should say, whether it's not just ticking on our milestone plan, but also asking ourselves that have we actually look at all the risk management, the what if scenarios, if nothing's going to surprise us, let's say when we really head closer towards execution. We normally try to consider it as early as possible, and how do we assure ourselves. And then of course, once we go to the scoping leading to the execution and closeout, that's when we normally, of course, steering committee, of course, needs to understand, make sure, are we on track? Are we still confident on the predictability of the preparation? Because there's a lot of risk involved. As I mentioned, there's a perpetual risk management happening. Based on things that we know, can we still make sure that you could say, if we committed a 30-day turnaround, is it still going to be a 30-day turnaround? If we committed, let's say, 50 scopes, are we still able to execute 50 scopes within a predetermined duration? So that's when that's a usual question that's being asked, and being assured. And then, are there new pieces of information as shared? No? We're still revolving around risk management. That may impact the bigger turnaround objectives, because these are the items that impact the premises. As I mentioned, if we have, let's say, a 30-day turnaround, a scope that requires, let's say, initially 25 days to execute, suddenly becomes potentially a 33-day event. So of course, that needs to be discussed. Can we do something about it? Can we bring it down to less than 30 days again, etc., etc.? How can we manage it? So these are the things that gets managed as we mature the plan. And then of course, typical question asked, of course, what help or support is needed, assuming that, because the steering committee, of course, make sure that we are kept on a particular guardrail, whichever direction we're heading. It's really making sure that what help is support to make sure we are kept on that particular track. And then, of course, as part of the post turnaround and closeout, and just really asking ourselves, were we effective in managing the risks? And are we actually learning from them? Because what we don't want, of course, is come the next turnaround event, we'll be seeing the exact same risks and pain points that we have that has manifested in a particular turnaround event. So, just to remind that the steering committee is not just to really to manage and make decisions, but also to make sure that there's clear guidance and direction setting along the way, not just on the earlier part, but still heading towards the tail end. Probably linking back to the value and influence chart that I've shown on the front end loading aspect. So similar here, if we make all the guardrails of the decisions early, of course, a lot of the influencing has been done already. So meaning we only need to manage any risks that surface if there are new pieces of information that hasn't been considered. All right, I guess that sort of concludes my my pack. No, just to recap, no. Um, in terms of definition, turnaround is a business event. So it's not just a particular, it's not a maintenance event, it's not an operations event. It's a business event because all the entire business is impacted. It has a severe business impact if not optimized. Wherein an asset or a section is put offline just to conduct, either major maintenance, tests, or upgrades, or tie-ins. Uh, Turnaround management process is a phased approach. I've shared here a sample for 6 phases. to meet these business objectives, the business event, starting from the long-term planning and trickling down to the specific turnaround event. For which the long-term planning then considers turnaround intervals or frequencies, the drivers, and the complexity. And then, of course, once we've set them upfront on the long-term plan, the boundaries, including cost, it trickles down to the event-specific strategies. Covering how do we actually plan this? Whether it's is it a 6 to 12 month event? Is it 18 to 24 month event? The risk management from lessons learned, scoping, resourcing, contracting, and of course the safety around it. The turnaround organization starts from the steering committee because we're starting from a long-term view, and then during that long-term planning and strategy, we appoint a turnaround manager to make sure we manage specific events and resourcing the rest of the turnaround organization accordingly. And then make sure that these are all resourced timely and upfront so that we don't have to manage playing catch up, for which, as shared earlier, we have far less influence if that happens on the latter phase. And then lastly, just to wrap up everything here in terms of value of the long-term planning and involvement of the decision or the steering committee upfront, having this robust long-term plan and strategy, complementing it with the engaged steering committee, helps set the boundaries for the turnaround to be successful and in full alignment with the wider business objectives. So just to make sure we're all on track, because any changes in either direction, of course, either throws off either the planning or makes the long-term plan not optimal. So so that's you could say it's just on time 1 hour. So at this point, I'm opening the floor for any queries from the panel.
Yep, thank you, Sir Nesty, for that lecture and recap. Anyone from our participants who have a question, you can raise your hand, or you can also message us on the chat section. In the meantime, sir, we actually have some questions from the registration earlier, but it might have already been addressed.
We
So
can still go through them.
yep. Okay, so while waiting for the other question, so how does early leadership involvement impact the overall success of a shutdown or turnaround?
Okay, sige, thanks. So for that one, I think I've answered it in passing, no? But just to probably stress the point here, leadership involvement, particularly the steering committee team, um, it's not they're normally comprised of the same people who makes the biggest decisions in their particular departments: operations, maintenance, projects, safety, finance. So more often than not, since they provide the steer and the guidance, early involvement means there's early decisions, early provision of the guardrails or the boundaries that the turnaround team can play around, I should say. And then if they're involved very early enough, you could say there's alignment way up front. That means if there's anything that they have to know or that has to change that may make things either suboptimal or less efficient, at least they are already there involved. They already know the history. They already know the premises, the basis of prior decisions, for which, since they also know the general direction the entire business is going, um, they would also provide the right changes in that direction or steer if it has to come to that particular you could say, um, because more often than not, of course, a change in decision, of course, throws off the turnaround planning team in terms of, okay, we're going to do something else now. But but early involvement really make sure that's defined upfront, meaning there's going to be far less headache come when we're doing the detailed planning, because a lot of the boundaries have been set already, rather than getting a surprise that something comes up in a detailed planning, and then we realize that, oh, this particular decision, if it floats, we haven't actually decided if it's if is it a boundary, is it just a line in the sand, etc., etc. So it's really more of setting boundaries and having the decision makers aware of the prior decisions, and then they're involved anyway in the specific streams that are involved in the implementation.
All right, thank you, sir. So I did get a message from directly here on Zoom, but maybe we go ahead with this two first.
Okay, sure.
So, second one is, what are some common challenges in long-term SEO strategy and how can they be addressed?
Yeah. So at least from I probably speak from my experience. I haven't seen any benchmark here. But for long-term strategy, more often than not, the challenge here is really uh, really committing to the strategic um, input for the long-term plan. So I've shared around complexity and frequency, for which the complexity, as mentioned, is other than the factors, there's also the scopes that has to be considered, whether it's maintenance projects, upgrades, and whatnot. Um, because if they are not identified early enough, if they are not fixed enough, then you could say that becomes a confusion point for the turnaround planning team, for the turnaround management team once we start the scoping, because these are shared. If these are not cast in stone as early as possible, it gets confusing whether are we going to do a 10-day turnaround event, are we going to do a 30-day outage event. So these are the things that if not identified early enough. Another aspect is that's why I have to highlight this particular topic around early involvement of leadership, because there are some cases that the steering committee is incomplete. um, there's a steering committee that was commissioned to make the decisions upfront. However, you could say not all the right representation is there in the steering committee team. So meaning once some of the risk areas become apparent on the scoping or detailed planning phase, and then let's say for example if we don't get the finance manager involved, for example, of course if there are some boundaries around it that's not set in stone, there's going to be you could say a difficult discussion, and on the worst case really trying to call whether it's worst case sometimes really thinking how can we are we going to drop some scopes. Of course, from a finance perspective that sounds okay, but from a technical perspective it's going to be very uncomfortable because we're sacrificing either technical integrity or asset safety. So those are, you could say, some of the common challenges in the long-term strategy.
Okay, so third one, can you share an example where strategic planning improved turnaround predictability?
Yeah, so for that one, so I'm going now from the long-term planning from to the specific turnaround assumptions and premises. So this is where we, let's say, for example, logistics and facilities management, uh, offshore environment or a remote environment. More often than not, the personnel that we can mobilize there is limited. So we need to look at, okay, how do we um, are we just going to accept that, you can say, if there's a hundred personnel on board limitation, are we just going to accept 100 personnel on board limitation, or are we going to invest upfront and, let's say, try to think of any means to make it 150 personnel on board for whatever reason, whether it's putting temporary facilities or mobilizing a bigger vessel, for example, just to execute more activities and cover more scopes. Of course, it does include more cost eventually, but if it balances out the risk, then you could say those are the strategic planning elements we normally include. And why? How does it improve turnaround predictability? Of course, these are limitations. Personnel on board. So if we're going to plan for 100 personnel on board, that might of course, more often than not we try to work with the boundaries we have, right? So we try to plan for that one, and then suddenly if this particular strategic intent suddenly changes, suddenly it's available, we can provide for 150 capacity now. So of course, with the intent to optimize things, sometimes we try to insert scopes last minute, and then that really reduces predictability of the execution, because will there be clashes in the resources, especially the critical ones. For those, you could say, especially more often than not, we have respective A teams when if we're trying to troubleshoot difficult problems on site. These are the things that really makes the turnaround plan less predictable, because sometimes you might be surprised. Oh, we should be planning execution for a scope on, let's say, day 5, but suddenly it's because we throw in a lot of scopes last minute because there's a lot of other capacity or beds available. Then that becomes less predictable. Even more so if we haven't set a direction that suddenly on the flip side, I actually gave a good problem from 100 to 150 capacity. What if suddenly there's a restriction that reduces the capacity from 100 to let's say 80 personnel on board? So that even throws the challenge in the plan, you could say, out of the window and really try to squeeze things out. So how do we, if those particular restrictions and strategic intent are settled up front, that really helps the turnaround management team, you could say, have far less headaches. Um, One classic example is on the scoping itself. Is I already shared it earlier. Scope acceptance criteria. So we normally, have particular risk assessments in our scopes, whether it's high, medium, or low risk activities, and on some certain cases, we also have some gut feel whether whatever risk of not doing a particular scope happens, is it going to happen in the next 2 years? Is it going to happen in the next 5 years? So normally there's a threshold, at least from the asset that we're I'm handling right now. There's a threshold for that we set. Okay, that we don't deal with low risk activities. Medium, there's a case to case basis that we are going to deal with. High risk by default, we're going to accept it as a critical scope. And then, of course, the assessment of the scopes being high, medium, or low is, of course, it's a consensus across different disciplines. And that threshold, the threshold, not the risk, not the process itself, the threshold, that's the one being set upfront as part of the strategic planning and signed off by the steering committee, because that would then an easier discussion point in case, let's say, either a last minute scope comes in, or a different work preparation or work planning team, completely isolated from the initial scoping, suddenly comes up with, let's say, a whole list of activities they want to include in the turnaround. That particular acceptance criteria or scope change criteria is very helpful in terms of making sure that the organization is aligned up front, that, one, of course, nominate your scopes early, and number two, we will only be able to accept certain scope risks later on if they really have to inject additional scopes. So those are just two sample strategic elements that we normally set upfront that helps improve, making sure that we stick within our boundaries.
All right. So, before we go ahead with Cecil's question, let's just address this one from direct message. So, how important is cross-functional collaboration and STO execution?
Ah, good. That's a good question, especially for ano, no. At least from my experience, it usually surfaces between the day-to-day maintenance and the major projects, because more often than not, they have different timelines. Um, Usually, by the time when we normally ask for a particular maturity of the scope, um, there are occasions that the projects is not as mature as the maintenance scopes, for example, because the project scopes are usually mostly on the construction phase, for example, while the maintenance is really just waiting for the materials and waiting for the outage windows. So that's one. Another aspect is, of course, resource sharing, because, of course, the projects team, sometimes they have their own team. Sometimes they want to utilize some of the people already on site, because, of course, they're the more experienced personnel, and then they manage risk better than, you could say, personnel that's just going to mobilize on the asset, only a few times. Cross collaboration between the steering committee and the discipline is really helpful in terms of, these items are, you could say, put into light up front, because these are, you could say, clash areas or pain points, or push and pull areas that are, um, you know um, that are, if not surfaced, then it will really become a headache once we really execute. Another area, at least from my experience, is that if there is something that, let's say, the projects team needs to either work on in a particular part of the asset, and have to do some bit of commissioning, for example, or let's say, uh, put into production for a short period as part of their commissioning. We normally include it as part of the plan, and then, of course, get the operations involved, get even the maintenance involved, of course, because, of course, there's a different risk profile for that particular area, because we're already pseudo producing around that time as compared to the rest of the asset that you could say it's still in shutdown mode. So these are the coordination items we normally consider, but that's more on the detailed planning. If we're going to look at it from the strategic intent, at least from upfront, it's agreed. At least those I know of usually is more on the cost element. Which of this particular scope needs to be shouldered by the projects, which of this cost needs to be shouldered by the maintenance, especially for shared resources. Um, Contracts, since do we actually leverage the same contracts for both projects and maintenance, or other scope owners? So these are the in other resources actually. So that's, you could say, the number of the different, just a sample of a few of the touch points that is important, that needs to be considered when we're actually doing the planning, whether we're on the nitty gritty of the detailed planning or even better on upfront on the management level.
All right. So thank you, sir. Going ahead with Cecil's question. So, how to manage stakeholder expectations such that during planning, full support is given, but come sourcing and execution time, the budget is reduced to executing the bare minimum scope.
Ah, I think that's a fair question. There's a lot of constraints that can be introduced, for which more often than not the sum is, or at least the potential outcome is really reducing to bare minimum scope. But as shared on I think the second to the last slide, there's a perpetual risk management around it, right? So this, you could say, this is a particular inject in the planning that may have happened latter part of the turnaround cycle. For this one, of course, it's at least, for our side, that's why it is important to make sure that the risk management happens on a regular basis, mainly because these things, we need to fully understand the trade-offs of, you could say, dropping the scope or reducing the scope. um, you could say a similar example I had, not on the budget side, but really more on, yeah, just recently on the pandemic, wherein we have to rely on specialized vendors outside the Philippines, but because of the Delta variant, we're not able to mobilize them. So suddenly it's not, of course, cost, but at least we're pushed to the wall. We're not really able to execute the scope at all. We have to drop it. So how do we manage this particular, reduction of scope? So we just have to surface them. That, of course, management, here are the scopes that we are not able to execute. For this case, based on the budget, I am assuming the bare minimum scope is, of course, risk based. So we're going to execute just the highest of the high of the scopes in terms of risk, and then the slightly lower and probably the medium risk are the ones that are sacrificed here. These are the things that, of course, we have, that the management or the steering committee needs to understand, that, of course, it's a reality that sometimes budget is not available. But this is a trade-off. It's either, one, this particular scope is not executed, but there is a possibility that the risk that we perceive for this scope not being executed, whether it's going to leak in the next couple of years, whether it's going to fail, let's say, for an electrical system in the next X number of years, may happen before the next turnaround window. So, of course, sometimes we normally execute these activities preemptively, right? So of course, there's that risk aspect that they have to sign off that, this particular risk or hazard or event may happen, that will impact the business as a trade-off of this particular decision we're making in terms of, budget reduction. Another aspect, of course, another workaround, if it's not a discussion within the management team, trying to work it within the turnaround management and delivery teams, is really more on, is there a way to execute the scope with far less budget that we have. So whether it's simplifying some of the scopes. So if it's, well, for our case, like, for example, internal inspection, can we actually reduce it to a non-intrusive scope, for example? Can we just will it be a representative inspection for, let's say, for mechanical vessels, um, just to really mitigate and have an assessment of the risk, because that's also a good trade-off in terms of managing the risk whilst being faced with a budget constraint, for example. I mean, there are a couple of ways to skin a cat. Just the last example I gave is really more how do we manage it with, within the level of the turnaround management team and the turnaround delivery teams. On the worst case, if really we exhaust all options for that one, is the thing is we have to escalate the right level for this case, a steering team. That we initially set this particular boundary for scope acceptance. However, even if from our definition we have accepted these scopes to be executed, but because of the budget we can only execute as much. These are the scopes that we deem that are high risk or medium to high risk. However, we are not able to execute because we are either limited on time, limited on budget, or whichever resource that we have set ourselves constrained with. So yeah, so I guess the answer for I could give for that question. Thanks for that.
All right. So we thank you, Paul, Ms. Cecil. So we still have some time for a few more questions. Got another one on direct. Let me just put in. Okay, so based on your experience or recommendation, should the turnaround steering committee be established as a separate team or additional hires from the existing maintenance organization, planning, execution, and reliability, or can its responsibilities be integrated within the current maintenance structure?
Well, ideally, the steering committee is the existing leadership team, I should say. So if the right level of decision making, at least based on the example shown here, really rests within the maintenance organization, um, ideally they should still be the same people because more often than not, these are the same people that are involved in the bigger general direction setting of the business. That's the intent why we have to make sure that the steering committee are also the senior leaders involved in setting the direction of the organization, because they are involved both not just on the target setting and direction of the turnaround, but also for the general, you could say even the day-to-day running of the business, so that there's full alignment between what are we going to do as a business as a whole, and then what are we going to do particularly for a specific outage event. So what we do consider though as separate team or additional hires is usually on the maintenance planning, not on the maintenance, not on the steering committee, but more on the delivery team, particularly on the maintenance planning and execution. Mainly because historically, at least from where my practice, because of course the day-to-day maintenance happens regularly. Of course, there's a clash of priority between preparation of the turnaround scopes and preparation of the day-to-day turnaround maintenance activities. So for my case, I've had a couple of pain points previously that some of my turnaround planning have to do some bit of catch up, mainly because the turnaround team I'm managing is also managing the day-to-day maintenance, for which of course they have to manage. If there's something that breaks into the plan, they have to of course attend to that on short notice, which then compromises the long-term planning.
All right. So do we have any other questions from the group? It seems none from my direct messages anymore. So with that, perhaps we can wrap up our question and answer portion. So thank you, Sir Nesty, for answering our queries. At this point, we'd like to take a moment to present a certificate of appreciation to our speaker. So this certificate of appreciation is awarded to Mr. Ernesto Conanan II in recognition of his outstanding contribution as a speaker in the Leveraging Long-Term Strategy and Early Leadership Involvement for STO Improvement and Predictability webinar. His dedication, expertise, and commitment to the task at hand were instrumental in ensuring the success of the event. Given this 15th day of May 2025, signed by Mr. Erwin D. Bernal, the President of Erudite Reliability Services. Once again, sir, thank you po, and let's give him a big round of applause.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, sir. And um, thank you everyone for joining us today. But before we close, we'd like to share some upcoming events you may want to take part of. We also have our post-evaluation form QR code for you to scan. On this evaluation form, you can also input your names where we will which we will be using for the certificate of participation. All right, so next Thursday, May 22, the Association of Maintenance and Reliability Practitioner of the Philippines, or AMRPP, is having a webinar on maintenance strategies for a reliable plant equipment with Mr. Jason Mendoza. So join us next week, 2:30 p.m., and register by scanning in the QR code below or connecting with them on LinkedIn. Okay, just pausing this in. And next, the APM Lead Conference and Exhibition is having its third run on July 28 to 30, 2025 at Space One Ayala, Makati City. This is a 3-day event that brings together thought leaders and professionals from both finance and plant operations under the theme Synergize, building asset value through a unified vision of finance and plant management. Don't miss this premier gathering on asset performance management and register with your group today. 4+1 group promo is still available. You can contact the Erudite team for more details. We hope to see you there. Okay, so for those who want to explore today's topic further, we are inviting you to our upcoming STO public class on September 10 to 12, 2025. This 3-day intensive training is designed for professionals who want to level up their STO capabilities from planning and preparation to execution and post-analysis. You'll be learning directly from Mr. Nesty Conanan himself, our speaker today, and Mr. Echo Rivera, both seasoned experts in reliability and plant operations from Prime Energy Resources Development. Whether you're in maintenance, reliability, or operations, this class will give you the tools, frameworks, and strategies to lead or contribute meaningfully to successful STO events. So reserve your slot or reach out to our team for full details. We'd love to have you there. And lastly, we would love to commemorate. Oh, right. So we also have our other public training courses. So if you have any other queries, here is our Q3 and Q4 public training calendar. You can message us or connect with us over LinkedIn or Facebook. And lastly, we want to commemorate this moment with you. So I would like to request for everyone to join in and open their cameras for a photo op para magkakitaan na rin po tayo. Ayan. Hello po. Okay, just setting up. Yan, open po natin ang ating cameras and the team will be helping me in taking screenshots. All right. So ready? 3, 2, 1. Sige po, let's wait for the others to open. And please make sure to answer our post-evaluation form and do suggest if you have any other topics you want us to cover for our next webinars. All right, so let's take a picture in 3, 2, 1, smile. 1, 2, 3, smile. 3, 2, 1, smile. All right. So once again, everyone, thank you. Maraming salamat po and see you on our next webinar. Sir Nesty, thank you po for sharing with us your expertise. Thank you, everyone. See you next webinar. See you on our next events and I hope to see you on July on APM Lead. Maraming salamat po.